Hello, this is Mr. Kashmir, and this is Unit 3, Lecture F. Unit 3, Lecture F, of course, pertains to Course Reader F, and Course Reader F is all about a woman named Eve Ensler. Here's your big idea. Eve Ensler is a playwright, performer, and activist. She works to highlight the voices of women across the world through her work, and is a tireless crusader in the fight to end violence against women. As many of you know, and some of you may not, there is an epidemic in this country and throughout the world of violence against women. Roughly 1 in 4 women in the United States of America suffer from sexual violence at least once in their lives. And nearly 100% of the time, that violence comes at the hands of men. Across the world, 1 in 3 women is either beaten or sexually abused by men over the course of their lifetime. And in the United States alone, 500,000 women are raped every year in the United States of America. And 100 million women have had their genitals mutilated across the world. The list of statistics goes on, but the truth is that violence against women is rampant. It is a problem here in Chicago, across the country, and throughout the world. Has been for some time, and unfortunately still is today. Now, Eve Ensler is a theater artist. She writes plays, she performs, and she's also an activist. And she's crafted this career for herself in which she writes and produces and performs for stage and for screen. She writes books, she writes plays, and she has a charity, and she runs an organization that seeks through all sorts of ways to raise awareness about violence against women throughout the world. She's raised lots of money and lots of awareness in all corners of the globe in her crusade to raise awareness of women's issues and end violence against women. In this course reader, the first thing you'll find is a bio of Eve Ensler from her website. You'll notice that she's most well known for the Vagina Monologues, which was first performed in 1996 and has gone on to be performed all around the world, translated into roughly 50 languages, performed in over 100 countries. It's done on college campuses across the country every year. And she's gone on to a prolific career. She wrote I Am an Emotional Creature, which many of you have read. It's been adapted and is currently running off Broadway as a play right now. And you'll find much more about her, including her founding of the charity V-Day and the work that she does through that charity. E2, I've Xeroxed for you a portion of the Vagina Monologues. There are 4 sections in E2. E2-1 is the introduction to the 10th anniversary edition of the book. That's written by Eve Ensler. E2-2 is the original foreword of the Vagina Monologues, written by Gloria Steinem, who was one of the leading activists in the feminist movement of the 1970s and founded a magazine called Miss Magazine, and to this day remains one of the most prominent voices in the women's movement. E2-3 is Ensler's original preface to the Vagina Monologues, where she explains briefly why it's so important that this work be done, and why it's so important in her mind that vaginas be talked about, and also what happens when you do talk about them, and what happens to women and to our culture when we become more outspoken and clear about women's experience. And then E2-4 is the first monologue from the Vagina Monologues. It's quite a long play. We're not reading it in its entirety, just as we're not reading it in its entirety, just as we've not read The Crucible or Angels in America in their entirety, but I did want you to get just a sense of it. The Vagina Monologues is a series of monologues all pertaining in one way or another to the overall topic of vaginas. And Eve Ensler performed the Vagina Monologues as a solo one-woman show back in 1996. And it now gets produced and performed constantly all over the world, generally by an ensemble of women. Now, as high school students, you're going to need to bring some maturity to the table. The word vagina is not a word that gets used very often in high school or in the rest of our society. And so for this 1 week where we are discussing this play, we'll just all need to be extremely mature and open-minded and aware that the material is sensitive. E3 is a piece that Eve Ensler wrote this past fall in August of this past year. Actually, I believe it was just a couple days before you guys came back to school for your junior year, and it's called Dear Mr. Aiken. And I'll talk a little bit more about E3 in the fifth and final slide of this presentation. So how should you read this course reader? In E1, obviously it's her bio, so you want to be looking out for her accomplishments. Pay particular attention to two things, really. Her artistic achievements and her work as an activist. And these are not mutually exclusive, but do look out for, awards that she's won and pieces that she's done as an artist, and then how that's translated into activist work and what she's accomplished as an activist and what she continues to seek to do as an activist. In E2, you've got 4 sections. In the introduction to the 10th anniversary edition, you want to look out for main ideas, essentially. What are Ensler's main points? And specifically, I would say her reflections on the Vagina Monologues 10 years after it was first performed. This should go here, actually. E2-2, Gloria Steinem's piece. Again, you're looking for main ideas. Look for what Steinem says about the feminine in relation to God and religion, and look for what Steinem says about the changes in generations from what she calls the down there generation to our current generation. In both E2-1 and E2-2, and actually also in E2-3, since they are all essentially short essays, do look for thesis statements, look for supporting details, read these as short pieces of well-written nonfiction. One last note about E2-3. I think there are really 2 components to E2-3. There's the why, and then there's the effect. So there's the why she feels it necessary to address this topic, and then there's the effect of what happens when the topic is finally addressed. And then in E2-4, this is just to give you a taste of the Vagina Monologues. This is actually the first monologue of the show. It's the first piece that's performed in the show. And as such, it is sort of its own introduction. Like it's the first monologue that sets the stage for the rest of the show. So this may feel a little bit repetitive because this first monologue is almost like a 4th introduction. But please just go into it with an open mind. It's brief. And I want you to look for what is she telling the audience in this first monologue as she sets the scene for the rest of her play. And then in terms of E3, again, I'm actually going to talk about that on the next slide. So we've arrived at our last slide, optional pages and miscellaneous notes. So F3 is actually entirely optional, and it's very interesting, but it is optional. If you are not going to read F3, you can stop the lecture right now. If you are going to read F3, here's what you need to know. Last summer, during the lead-up to the elections, a representative, a candidate for the U.S. Senate named Todd Aiken made some controversial remarks about rape and abortion. Specifically, Mr. Aiken talked on a television talk show about his belief that rape does not end in pregnancy, and that rapes can't end in pregnancy because he says, that if a rape is, quote, a legitimate rape, then the female body has a way of, quote, shutting that whole thing down. Now, Mr. Aiken's remarks are entirely false. Rapes can and do end in pregnancy, and there's nothing about a rape that would make it impossible for a rape to end in pregnancy. The fact that Mr. Aiken was using this term legitimate rape seemed to imply to some people that he thought that some rapes were not legitimate. And the fact that he seemed to think that the female body could make sure that a rape doesn't result in pregnancy, that upset a lot of people, and is one reason why Mr. Aiken lost his election. This became a huge controversy in the election, and the websites below, these 3 websites, are 3 reactions to Mr. Aiken's response, or to Mr. Aiken's statement. And the letter, Dear Mr. Aiken, is Eve Ensler's response to Mr. Aiken. So if you are interested in recent politics, if you are interested in the controversy over whether abortion should be allowed in instances of rape, and if you are interested in women's issues, and the way that they are portrayed in our current politics, feel free to take a look at this. You may want to watch this video first to get a sense of what it is that's being talked about, and then read the Ensler article. And if you want more context, feel free to check these out, as well as do your own research. This was a really interesting, and for many people, a really upsetting controversy from just a few months ago. And because Eve Ensler chimed in and talked about her experience of rape, it felt apropos to this course reader. But it is slightly, it is its own sort of entire topic, in the sense that it takes a little bit of extra understanding and background knowledge to fully understand F3. And so even though F3 is about violence against women, just as the rest of the course reader is, F3 is optional. So feel free to look into it if it's something that interests you.